Well, welcome. Here we are, right in the middle of one of the most important times of the year for Milford. It's when we're going to choose the people who really affect our lives. Everybody thinks of selectmen, they think of other positions, but I've always said there is no more important position than school committee. For those parents who watch and think about it, by the time my ungrateful offspring hit high school, I was lucky to get an hour or two from them a day. The school committee sets the policy for 6 to 8 hours of your children's life a day. So you really do want to understand who you're voting for. When there's 5 different choices or 6 different choices, you're going to pick 2. Make sure you pick the right 2. And there's only one way to pick the right 2, and that's for you to become educated and decide which 2 believe in what you believe in. Not that anybody, we may all have differences, but make sure that you take a few minutes, get to know each of the candidates, and then pick the ones that you believe will do the best for our kids. We got 4,500 kids counting on 7 people. So it's an important position. And I do want to thank all the candidates, because too many times people are quick to tell you what's wrong, what isn't optimal, but there's not many people that actually stand up and say, I can do it better, and I'm going to try. So tonight we meet one of the people that is asking for your vote, and as always, I'll never tell you to vote for any specific candidate. I will beg you to vote. But let's start to get to learn about a new candidate. Let's start with an intro.
Thank you. Thank you for having me out on the show tonight. I'm Jennifer Parsons. I am currently a Milford resident. I've lived in Milford for the past 20 some odd years. I'm the mom of 2 students, one at Milford High School and one at Stacy Middle School. Next year I'll have 2 students, both at Milford High School. Actually, the way that we organize our schools here in Milford, next year will be the first time my 2 children have ever been
Together?
in the same school together, so that will be interesting. I've served on the Milford School Committee for 2 terms, for a total of 6 years, and I feel like I have learned along the way. I'm a lifelong educator, and I believe that my role in education has really touched all parts of my life, and serving on the school committee has allowed me to do exactly what you said, to look around to see what may benefit from my knowledge and expertise. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, for 3 more years of serving our community.
Now, your mom still lives in Milford, right?
My mom was born and raised in Milford, and she was shuttled away to Rhode Island by my father a number of years ago when they first got married. But I do still have a number of relatives who live in Milford, and spent many a day here growing up visiting the Purchase Street Market. My grandmother lived on Purchase Street, and I have many great memories of Milford as a young child, and my mother was especially happy to learn that I was going to make a life here with my family. She's very proud of that.
Let's start.
Okay.
Jen, I know this is, round 3 for you?
It is round 3. Yes.
Before we start, did you ever think you'd be looking for your 9th year in office?
I'll be perfectly honest with you, Al, no, I did not. I think I'd kind of heard from people that, once you get through your 2nd term, you're going to be tired. And I remember running for the first time thinking, this is so exciting, this is awesome. Like, who would ever say they're tired? And, I won't lie that in the 2nd term, there have been times when it has felt like a lot. But there is so much going on in the Milford Public Schools right now, and there's so much to be excited about. And when I look at my family and look at what I feel I may be able to contribute to, I have come to the conclusion that my work here is not done yet.
Now, you're kind of unique on the school committee, that you got both sides.
Yes.
In Milford, you got administration. Your day job, you're part of a school system.
Yes.
How does that work?
I have found that both roles have been mutually beneficial. I've really had the privilege of working with a lot of really great teachers, administrators. I've worked with a number of school committees over the years in my role as principal and now in my role as an assistant superintendent of schools. And I find I learned so much. I've learned so much from the administration here in Milford that I've been able to bring back and apply in my professional life. And I've learned a lot in my professional life that I feel I'm able to bring to this role in school committee. I understand how schools work. That's kind of all I've
during
lived
the
and
day,
breathed.
you're sitting there saying, I want more, I need more. And then at night, you show up and say, okay, Josh, I know you want more. I know you need more. Because I was
Yep.
saying that 4 hours ago.
Yep, yeah, it is kind of a funny balancing act when you think of the different roles that you play, and I do think that's one thing we all have to think about when we sit on these elected committees. So we wear lots of roles. That you wear your professional role, and I think we're pretty lucky in Milford. We have a very diverse group of school committee members, and we each bring some different perspective. I may bring the education perspective, someone else brings a business perspective, and that kind of helps make us whole as a group of 7. I'm a mom too, and you have to be very careful when you're sitting in these roles that you're not mixing your mom role, your school committee role, your professional role. So there is a lot of thinking that goes into my conversations and the way that I try to conduct myself.
Yeah, I wouldn't say any of the principals will try and sneak anything through on a budget, but they got to know that during the day, you're in their role, so you can see right through any budget irregularities, somebody trying to do a little extra for the kids here.
I would say that if I've sat in meetings where I've had colleagues who've said, this principal, what are they thinking? They're asking for this, it's too much. And I would counter back with, if a principal isn't asking for those things, they're not doing their job. And I think all of us as principals know our job is to advocate. You're not ever going to get everything,
No.
And that's kind of the danger. It's kind of, I like actually the way that our administration presents the budget to us, because they present it to us as a whole, and we see each school broken down, but we don't have 5 different principals coming and verbally kind of making their case, because that's very difficult.
I remember the first time I was chair of the school budget subcommittee. Back then, we used to go through line item, the big book.
Yep.
They handed me a 3-inch binder.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying, wait a minute, I'm not an educator. I'm not qualified to decide how many rolls of toilet paper. I'm not qualified to decide how many books, how much heat. Why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we changed the budget to say, wait a minute, at home, I don't
Right.
count rolls of toilet paper.
Right.
I don't count what magazines my kids used to buy. You say, I got a budget of $100, because that's what I make. $30 goes for here, $20. And we changed, this was now 12, 13 years ago, when we changed the budget over
Right.
to say, hey, school committee, you got 62% of whatever money we have.
Mm-hmm.
Spend it, because
Yeah.
you're supposed to, well, especially you know both sides of it.
Right. Right. And I think if you get any principal up there, they will tell you where every last dollar is going in full detail. And even as school committee members, we don't need that level of detail. We need to understand the big picture. What are the programs? What do you need to move it forward? The nitty-gritties, that's the principal's job. That's what
Yeah,
they're
and
supposed to be doing.
After we stopped doing the silliness on the budget, and it was silly, because when I'm trying to get my hands around how much electricity you're going to spend, you got Rob Quinn.
Right. Right.
He's forgotten more than I'll ever possibly learn, right? So you sit there and say, don't get me involved in that.
Right.
Let's
Right.
talk about overall, how do we make the budget more effective?
Yes. Yes.
And like you said, if the school committee isn't advocating for 64%, then you're not doing your job.
That's right. That's
We
right.
know you're going to end up around 62. It's always, I get a kick when people tell us that, well, there's never any fights on town meeting floor. Everybody just agrees with everything. I start laughing and saying, go to the subcommittee meetings.
I can't think of a single disagreement in the subcommittee meeting.
Never.
And I think everyone is coming from a good place, and I think that's part of the beauty of having people, even the current subcommittee. I know we've had lots of different conversations about why do you in that kind of position, and what's the value of that, and what's the shift in the kind of the philosophy of the schools for why you might need a social worker or something like that. And I think that's actually one of the fun parts of the job is despite some of the, inherent challenges of people who are watching the money and people who are watching the kids, it's exciting to talk about why we're doing what we're doing and what the impact is going to be of all those dollars that are going into the schools.
Okay, we'll get down to starting.
Okay.
Jen, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, why I would really appreciate your vote is I think I've, at 6 years in, had a proven track record of being a collaborative school committee member, of really listening to constituents who have come to me with questions or problems. I feel that I've been able to work effectively and professionally with the different boards around our town, especially the Finance Committee, with whom we spend a lot of time, especially at this time of year. I would say, with over 25 years in public education, I would say, compared to anybody else, I put myself out there as someone who really knows education inside and out. I believe in public education. I'm the product of public education. My 2 children have thrived in the Milford Public Schools, and that's not to say that every minute of their being has been perfect. I've certainly had, my share of conversations and questions with schools when things have, not seemed clear to me. And I think that I'm a fairly good voice of reason. And I think when people come to me with questions, I've been able to help people either look at both sides of a situation or help people, including my colleagues on the school committee, figure out, which direction are we going to go in, and why is that going to be beneficial both for our taxpayers, whom we're responsible to, and our students. And I think when we look at our school committee, we've had a number of changes over the past several years. We have a lot of members who are either in their first term or just rounding the corner into their second term, and sometimes there is something to be said for some institutional history and someone who's been able to say, yeah, we did it this way, and now we're doing it a different way, and these are the reasons why. And that's not to say, I think there's a lot to be said for a fresh perspective. But I think if I were to continue the way I have been, which is trying to listen and trying to be fair, I would hope that the voters of Milford would feel that I've been respectful and able to assist our district with making some good progress.
Well, I think Milford poses a unique environment. The next question I'll ask you is, how do you feel about profanity? And not normal profanity, but the profane words that the FinCom doesn't like. 2.5 override and debt exclusion.
Mm-hmm. I learned earlier today that was a profane saying in this town. What I do believe about the town of Milford is that we are a very financially sound town. And we have the highest ratings when it comes to our debt and when it comes to the management of our finances. And I haven't seen an occasion in this town, the way things are run, to have to advocate for increasing our taxes, because we have people like yourself and the other finance committee members who have been able to find a way. And I think sometimes if you aren't able to connect and you're not able to find a way, which is not something I've seen here sitting on this board for 6 years, that's when you start to get into those, oh my God, how are we going to handle this as a town? We have a catastrophe on our hands and we just don't know. That's not been the appetite in Milford. And so my perspective on that is, as things progress and the schools are getting what they need to move forward, there's no need for that.
And, it's interesting because we joke about it, and I'm the biggest one saying we don't allow profanity in the FinCom room. Because when you're sitting on $30-odd million tucked away, I can't see where we need one. Obviously, every year school committee has a wish list, and then we sit down and we work out what can we afford. And some things get put off, but I can, at least my own opinion, has been that I cannot remember one item that we really needed. The elevator broke. We didn't have $80,000 in the budget for it. We found it.
Yeah.
You got people like Rob Quinn. To me, he's one of the most trusted people that come before us. Because if he comes in and says, this is going to cost $50,000 and I don't have an alternative, I'll still razz him. but at the end of the day, it's going to be a rare day that I don't trust them.
Well, and I think that's the key, and the key in these positions, and I mean, that's a big part of our role on school committee. One of the very few true responsibilities that we have is hiring a superintendent, and then watching what happens under that superintendent and who that person hires. And I know that Rob Quinn predated our current superintendent, but they work very well together, and we have people in those positions right now that we do trust. And I think now, based on some things and conversations that have happened this winter between the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee and our town accountant, I think that we're even working towards improving the communication amongst all of the players, and that's huge. And I think keeping those open lines of communication is only going to be beneficial for all of us moving forward.
What do you think are the three biggest challenges the school committee faces?
So in thinking about the three greatest things, because I had kind of been thinking on that, certainly the rise in our student population is a challenge. So we've had more students moving into Milford.
Explain that. I'm sorry to interrupt,
Okay, sure.
but we've been talking how 1974, first year that the new high school graduated a class, there were 222 of us. Year and a half ago, there was 260. 45 years later, that's one kid per year. Now, all of a sudden, surprise.
Right, 200 kids have popped out of, we're not quite sure, but they're here. And, that's the great thing about public education. Kids move, and we don't have the luxury like a private school of saying, we're full, we can't take you today. They come to us and we welcome them, and we are charged with educating them to the best of our ability. So, if you took 190 kids, 200 kids in the aggregate, 20 students is a teacher. So when you start multiplying and thinking about what is the impact of 200 students in a very short period of time on Milford. And so when you asked about, I happen to work in a district where we have a dramatic increase in our population, and given that I work in a central office, I see what happens every single time a registration comes in, and I see the impact firsthand of what the trickle-down effect is. And in our case in Milford, the number of new students also happens to match up with an increase in our population of English language learners. And so not only do we have large numbers of students moving in, but they're students who come with different complexities and challenges in terms of how we can appropriately educate them. So clearly, number one, dramatic rise in our population, and what are we going to do about that, and how are we going to make sure everyone's getting what they need. The second challenge right now that I think actually goes along with the first challenge is the fact that we have some buildings that are approaching the end of their useful life, and we've had some buildings that have really, really done a great job for us over a period of many, many years. And at a certain point in time, we all know that systems age. Sometimes repairs are more costly in the aggregate when we look at everything that needs to be done than maybe looking at something new or renovated. And we're also at this place in Milford where I think we really want to be looking at different types of programs and things, and we're just simply running out of space. And so I think a major challenge, and really this challenge is really one of the deciding factors for me in terms of why I wanted to run again, was really starting to figure out what are our plans and how are we going to serve the students of Milford for the next 50, 60, 70 years. So that's another challenge, and clearly that comes with financial and philosophy challenges, what's the right way to house students and educate students, and all of that. Third challenge that I think about is our student population, and I'm not talking about L students now, I'm talking about just students in general in the 21st century, and really making sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our kids. And what our students are coming to schools with these days is very different than when I was in school, I'm guessing than when you were in school. We live in a community where we have a very highly regarded vo-tech school, and we have students who are looking for that kind of learning during their high school years, and not every student needs to or can attend a non-traditional high school. So what are we doing in our high school? And I think we're doing a lot actually to support those students and really look at what is available for these kids the day that they walk out of Milford High School for the last time as a matriculated student, and figuring out what are we doing to support them while they're here and preparing them for 21st century work and job force.
And that's something that, candidly, I've asked many years. We'll talk about special needs. I believe we have one of the best programs in the area. I'm really pleased with when I see some of the advanced programs for the top students. Where I still believe personally there's a hole. Is I think of people like my father. He came over from Portugal. He had 4 years of schooling. So you put him in an organic chemistry class, he's not going to do well. You give him a tool. He was a master, an artist. He could do things. He made his own tools with a little forge in the back. Just absolutely in awe, I'd sit there watching what he could do with his hands. But then I think about it. If he went to Milford school system, he'd hit the 8th grade, and he wouldn't be top 10% of the class. So he'd never get into BVT. What are we doing for the kids? They're smart. They're hardworking. But they're not top 10% academic. What are we doing for those kids?
And what I would argue is that from the time that I've seen this new high school administration, and I really liked our old administration too, but what I've seen happening with this new administration under our principal, Mr. Otlin, is an incredible focus on looking at those kids who aren't your narrow academic pathway. And even when my son, who's an 8th grader, was just looking at the electives for next year, and he was able to pick from things like woodworking, printmaking, graphic design, robotics, sports management. There are so many different opportunities that if I was an 8th grader, I'd be like, well, God, there's tons of things. I don't know which one to pick because they're so intriguing. But the focus in our high school right now, and I mean, I think as a principal, you got to look at your really high achieving academic students, and yes, your special ed students who need a different kind of learning. But there's also that other population of students, and those are the students that I think our high school is really looking at right now in terms of bringing in some of these different types of programs, the building and trades program, the banking and business program, the volume of internships that our high school is looking at putting together for our students, especially in careers that our principal has really become very well versed in, that may not put a kid on a 4-year college trajectory, but will put a kid on a trajectory for a really comfortable and successful lifestyle.
Well, some of these craftsman roles, they're $60,000, $70,000 a year.
Yes.
You know, this is not.
Yes.
The alternative is to learn how to say, do you want fries with that order?
Well, and that's what has been shared with us quite a bit, that you've got retail, you've got food service, and we need those industries as much as anything else. But when a kid has a lot of different options available, we want to make sure that they're exposed to all. The other thing that I've seen, do you mind if I go on about something else?
No, please.
So starting in our 8th grade this year, through the work that Tahan Ross, our middle school principal, has done in conjunction with Framingham State, a new program is being rolled out to the current 8th grade called the Metro West Scholars Program. And that program is allowing students, by the time they're done with high school, they will have visited multiple job sites to learn more about different types of industry and different types of possibilities in the labor market. And they will also have had the opportunity to take multiple college level courses, not APs, but real, like legit Framingham State credits in a variety of different areas, co-taught by like Framingham State professors and Milford High School teachers. And that program is really designed for kids who may be first-generation college students in their family. I mean, it's available to all kids, but they're really hopefully targeting kids who may not be thinking about college as a potential pathway. And those are the kind of things we need to be doing in our district, and I see people making efforts to bring those opportunities to our students.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against somebody who wants to go work at McDonald's, work at Burger King, if that's truly what they want.
Right.
But I want them to understand that there are other options. You could come out of high school if you had some kind of experience as a biotech operator and make a comfortable living.
Yes.
We see people with BSs coming out making 55, 60 grand a year. That's, so if I can make 30 or 35 to start.
Well, we also see that the rate of kids actually receiving a college degree who begin in college is something in the 60% range. So lots of kids make that step because I think in some cases they feel like this is the only thing I can do. I have to go to college because that's what you do. You end 4 years of high school, you go to college, and then you start to accrue this pretty significant debt.
Yes.
Which I know because I'm looking at colleges right now for a high school junior. And if that's not really how you're wired, or maybe it's not what you're ready for. Maybe you'll be ready for a 4-year college, but maybe not right when you're 18. So what are some other possibilities? And that's what I've heard our high school principal talking about, where kids can actually enter the workforce not at rung number 1, because they've had such training
Right.
and internship and experience and exposure as high school kids.
Well, I remember when Emily, my youngest, graduated. All of a sudden, it was like I got a $5,000 a month raise. I'm just stunned because, my parents worked hard. Mom worked as a drill press operator in Draper. My dad, he made the big money, 20-some, almost $30,000 on General Motors floor, doing assembly.
Yeah.
Yet they somehow put $6,000 away to pay for my Holy Cross education 4 straight years. I graduated with no debt. I had $32.80 in my pocket, but I was at least break even.
Right. You were on the better end of things.
When I see this year's tuition, tuition, room and board, it's 70 grand. You got 2 coming. I don't know of many people who have $70,000 to $140,000 of disposable income.
Well, right. People have said to me it's play money, but it's only play money until all the bills come in. The bills come in and the loans come in, and
well,
that's reality.
Again, when I graduated school, I got $32.80 in my pocket, but I didn't have a $1,000, $2,000 a month school loan bill to pay.
Right.
I don't know how these kids, if their parents can't help them, if you got a $1,000, $2,000 monkey on your back, how do you go out and buy a house and a car and and eat?
Right. No, absolutely. It will handcuff you, and no one needs to be that tied down when you're 21 or 22 years old. That's not setting you up for success.
I can't even imagine being 21 again and owing $100,000.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
You talk about the schools, and one of the things people bring up all the time, Milford student scores, when I look at the aggregate, average, are lower than every town around us. What do you say about that?
Well, we could say a lot of things about every town around us. So we could say the median price of a home in Milford is lower than some of the towns around us. Milford is in a really unique geographic location. We're surrounded by very small, much more homogeneous communities with just frankly a different demographic and a different population. And when you look at us having a very diverse population, students who come from families where there's a high level of education in the home, some from parents who have not been college educated, and all these kids are mixed together in the Milford Public Schools, and our teachers have a big job in front of them. They have to figure out where everybody is and how are we going to move all those kids forward. So it is true that our MCAS scores aren't going to look like some of our surrounding communities. However, when you look at some of the information from the Department of Education and they decide who your community counterparts are, we're very much right in the mix with communities that have a much more similar demographic and student population to Milford. That being said, are our scores where I would like them to be? No, they're not. And I think, DESE has really charged all of our schools with looking at more than just a raw score, looking at our student growth and comparing our students to their peers across the state from one year to the next, and how have we moved those students forward. And in my estimation, that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing in Milford, and we are doing in Milford. looking at who are our learners. If you take a student, and I know that our superintendent, Dr. McIntyre, has talked about some of our newcomers at the high school this year, newcomers to the English language. And within 1 year of being in this country, you're required to take that MCAS. So if you're coming in as a 9th grader and English is brand new to you, you're expected by the 10th grade to be able to take that English MCAS. And that's really your ticket to a high school graduation. And when you see, 40 new kids at your high school level, it's going to impact your scores. It just is. So the question is, what are we doing?
It's easy. It's not easy for you because you got kids in Milford High. For me, it's easy to talk about my kids as 4,500 kids and to look at the overall trends.
Right.
But if I was in your shoes as a mother, 2 kids, the question I'd ask is, are my kids going to get a good education?
Right.
I know it's great for the town and all the the heck with that. How are my 2 babies, the most important things in my life? I can see my vision getting very, very focused. How would you answer somebody who says, my kid's going to get a good education?
I think the answer is when we prepare our budgets and we look at what is needed to educate students in Milford, we might need something that another community may not need. So we need our teachers to be far more fluid and fluent in their ability to teach English language learners, which our district has worked on. We have teachers right now who are getting their masters in ELL on top of their regular, educational degrees. We have a very large population of teachers and tutors who are there to support kids who have needs. And where that all mixes in with a student who doesn't have that level of need, if we know we have a large population of students who need additional supports, if there's an absence of supports for them, then everybody pays the price for that. The students who need the supports aren't getting what they need. Teachers are struggling because they're probably whipping out their phones trying to use Google Translate to communicate with some kid who's got a need that can't be met. If kids' needs aren't met, the kind of other side of that is then behaviors become challenging because frustration builds, and especially imagine sitting in a classroom and you can't understand what's happening around you and you're not getting the tools to learn. So when we really look at putting money into our students who have some of these needs, that's benefiting everyone. In addition to that, when I look at the offerings for students who need to be challenged and who need a higher level of rigor, that hasn't been lost in our schools either. So when I look at AP this, AP that, college this, there are all kinds of offerings that students are able to take and really move themselves on the progression where we want them to make growth. The students who may already be starting with a pretty robust skill set. So when I look at my 2 kids, and I'll put it that way because you asked about them.
Sure. But that's what any parents get.
Yep.
Yeah, talk to me about the overall, but wait a minute.
Right.
My 2.
Right. And I've seen amazing growth for my 2 kids. And, as I said earlier, that's not to say that every class, every year, every situation has been a bed of roses. And a lot of what happens with your kids in school is a learning process for you as a parent. But when I look overall at what my kids have accomplished and what the offerings are, I don't think my 2 children could begin to even touch taking advantage. And actually, sometimes I get frustrated because I'll say, for example, to my 8th grade son, you should do this. You should, oh, I'm not going to do that, Mom. And to me as a parent, that's frustrating because I do see the number of things, whether it's the arts, music, athletics, that Metro West Scholars Program that I referred to earlier. There are many, many options that we offer our kids here, and some of those options don't also always have to come from the gen ed classroom. They come from what I would consider a full package.
But now, the fundamental question.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of sending my son, daughter
Yeah.
to Milford High or X High.
Yeah.
Why would I trust Milford High to educate my child?
That's a really good question, and I think some of the challenges are what you talked about your 2 babies, and I think every parent or every set of guardians looks at their own child through a very unique lens, and people also have their own kind of preconceived notions about what is right for schooling. And so it's hard to say that I want to limit someone's choices in terms of what's right for their own child. But when I look at Milford High School, when I look at the offerings, when I look at the experience that students have had there, when I listen to our high school principal and assistant principals talk, and when I hear the presentations from the teachers at Milford High School, and when I sit in that auditorium, and I've now done it for 6 springs in a row, and sat through awards night and talent show night and graduation and honor society inductions, it's staggering. It's staggering what is happening at that high school in terms of how we are, in my opinion, competing with other high schools, some of which maybe our scores aren't quite the same, but there's still high schools in our area. I don't see a shortfall in that high school. I see a really vibrant place where kids.
The person who taught me was Tommy Davrin.
Yeah.
8th grade, middle school East was his fiefdom.
Yeah.
He took such pride in the fact that he was entrusted with 350 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the parent-teacher board there.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember, and I knew I was going to get an interesting reaction. So I said, Tommy, why do your scores suck? And he just looked at me without blinking and said, because you're ignorant. I said, great, enlighten me. And he did. He showed me, because he looked at me straight in the eye and says, I'll put my top students against any town around here, and we will not come up short. The problem is we don't have a Gaussian curve. Our curve is bimodal. So you've got the top students, and then you've got the kids who are good students, but like you say, if they put you, here you are, you're successful, you're educated. Okay, Jen, I'm going to put you in a class of Mandarin, and in a year you're going to take an assessment score in Mandarin. I dare say most of us wouldn't do optimally well.
Agreed.
And that's what we're doing. And then we're just taking the 2 Gaussian curves, mashing them together, and reporting a number.
Yes.
So I think a lot of it is that people don't understand. And I won't, in my mind, allow the school committee to be the judges. The judges were the colleges my kids applied to. And when every college my oldest daughter applied to accepted her, I said, hey, you guys aren't doing too bad of a job. Because in my mind, you're there to educate my child. Unfortunately, some people believe you're there to raise them too. But you're there to get them the opportunity to go to the college of their choice.
Right.
And then have them prepared to stick.
Right.
Now, when you say, oh, so many kids aren't ready. Well, my oldest did have a bad semester her junior year. She got a 3.95. She got that B+, so we accused her of partying too much. But the last 3 years of college were all 4.0s.
Yeah.
I can't ask more of Milford than to get her the opportunities to go to the school she wants,
Yes.
and then have her prepared to hit 4.0s straight across the board, except second semester junior year, not that I remember. Of course, she showed me how smart she was. She went and pulled my transcript.
I'm sure it looked just as good, Al.
No. She looked and said, Dad, I don't see all 4.0s here. I'm like, go look at your mother's.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. We have kids that are getting accepted at the most prestigious colleges and universities, and one of which is right here in our own state. We have a wonderful public higher education system right here in Massachusetts, and we have kids who are doing very, very well for themselves.
And that, to me, is the ultimate judgment of the school system.
Yes.
If my daughter couldn't get into any of the schools she wanted,
Right.
yeah, part of it I'd blame her, but the other part I'd say, I want to know if all the other kids, if they're all having this trouble,
Right.
then we have a systemic problem.
Right.
But we don't seem to.
No, year after year we see droves and droves of students.
Now, you've talked about buildings. I mean, Woodland, I'm really proud of. It's a
We should
beauty.
all be, yeah.
And I'm really proud that we did it without profanity. No debt exclusion, no 2.5 override.
Yeah.
Now we're saving up. It's been a couple of years. I still think we got another 6 years to save up for the next school. Which one would you think it is?
Well, I think from everything that we've seen and heard, Milford High School is the next school that I think really needs, and I think that the data has shown us needs some support. You know, Stacy has its challenges as well, and I think that's going to be a question that our community is really going to have to think long and hard about. Where will our priorities lie? There'll be billions of studies and lots of information. And you know that once you get into the process of this, you start looking at all of the different versions of Model A, Model B, Model B1, Model B2, you know, all the way through Z. And at the end of the day, what we really need to do, and I know Dr. McIntyre is starting this work, is start educating our community in terms of what is our vision long-term, what will make the most economic and educational sense for our community. And then that's where the rubber's going to meet the road, and we're going to have to make some decisions. Even like Woodland, it wasn't a straight, okay, we have a 3-4 school, we're going to rebuild a 3-4 school. We looked at a whole shift of models and what was right for kids, and we ended up with that amazing building for our students.
People are asking, are we going to build a new high school or renovate the school?
You know, I think we all know, anybody who's kind of paying attention in the news sees that the cost of new high schools today, you're talking 200 million, 250 million. It's a lot of money. So I think that when we start getting down into what are our possibilities, we're really going to have to look at what's the structural possibility. I've heard people talking about maybe an 8 to 12 building, maybe not, maybe a 9 to 12, maybe doing something different with Stacy in the interim. But in terms of a renovation or a rebuild, I think we really have to look at what are the pros and cons of each, and what would essentially be the most bang for our buck that would be the most economically feasible for our town. I mean, is it amazing to think, oh my God, we could build a big, huge, you know, beautiful, brand new high school? Sure, that's really tempting. It's a shiny new thing. And new is awesome in many ways. But I lived through a renovation it was an elementary school, but at the end of a renovation, a 50-year-old elementary school looked as brand new as Woodland looks. So I think it's all going to depend on
My biggest problem is I shake my head, and when they were talking about Woodland, do we renovate, do we build new? I laughed because I said, let's go through all the studies and then build new. End of story, because you can't build on top of the kids.
Right.
You know, when we did Brookside, we built essentially a half of another school.
Right.
By adding on to the high school, Memorial, Woodland.
Yeah.
And that was 300 kids.
Right.
Where would we put 1,200?
Well, yeah.
You know, and you think about it, where would you put a new building? The only land we own that could even be close would be Asylum Street.
Well, and then you have to start talking about, well, what would that look like? Is that a convenient place to have a school? Do we want buses driving up Asylum Street? It's, you know, and that's the thing. That's why you have to look at every one of the possibilities and say yay or nay, and these are the reasons why.
Yeah, my gut feeling still is we'll build a new wing, move the kids into that wing, renovate this wing, move the kids over, and maybe sometime build a field house in between so the kids have that. Because even a new school, the state won't pay for that swimming pool we have.
Well, and we don't want to touch our swimming pool.
We don't want to, and if we did, we'd have to pay dollar for dollar.
Right.
They won't touch the auditorium.
Right.
I mean, if you think of Aldo and Jonathan came up with a cafetorium, that's how we got away with it.
That's what they touch, yep.
But you can't use the cafeteria and the auditorium at the same time because they're both one.
Right. And I mean, in elementary school, you can get away with that, but you can't get away with that in a high school like ours.
And that's why you start talking about the 250 million and the crazy numbers.
Yeah. What we do need is a high school that has the space to run the programs that we need and would allow us the space to expand. I mean, we've got a preschool sitting in a high school. We've got a central office sitting in a high school. So I think we have, in addition to just deciding new build, renovate, we've got to also think about the impact on some of the other programs or offices that are housed there. What will that look like? Because when we talk about offering a larger variety of options for our kids at the high school's out of space.
Right.
They're using every closet and every...
And see, that's where I get back to the FinCom. We have to work with the school committee on what can we afford and how best to do it.
Right.
Not my job, because I don't know what's best to
Right.
educate
Right.
a child.
Mhm.
You know, and that's where I get back to years ago when you asked me to count rolls of toilet paper. I'm joking, I'm being facetious, but don't ask me to get involved in the educational policies, because
Right.
I'm not
Mhm.
in a position where I can have an educated opinion.
Right. Right.
So-
And that's why we employ those who do.
That's why I have a
Yes.
school committee.
And that's why we elect those who
If,
work.
if we
Yes.
didn't need somebody to be looking at the policies,
Right.
then you'd have a FinCom just say, okay, Kevin, here's $62. Shoo, go run the school.
Right.
You know, so when it comes down to the new schools, I can see us working with the school committee, saying, okay, what are your ideas?
Right.
Brand new high school, okay, 250 million, no,
Yeah.
then, no, okay,
Yeah.
renovate, how would we do it?
Yep. Yeah.
But you all have to come up with the philosophy
Yes. Yes. That's
that
right.
says we're better off having a 9 to 12 or a
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago when we had the original Brookside and Woodland,
Mm-hmm.
the Kumbaya principle spread, and you had the one classroom with 50 kids
Mm-hmm.
and dividers.
Yep. The open classroom.
Oh my God, was that a disaster.
Yes. Yes.
You know, back whenever they built it, it was the trend.
Right.
So, you know, even when you count on the professionals, sometimes it's not optimal.
Well, and I think, anyone who knows anything about education, probably not unlike other businesses, a lot of pendulum swinging goes on. And it looks really good now, and we try it out, and it didn't work so well, so now we tried a different way, and then everybody says, we did it that way 50 years ago, we're back to that.
Here we go back.
Hopefully with some
Now,
more research.
if you had the
and-
magic wand and you could change one thing, what would you change in our educational system?
I'm so glad you said it that way, because magic wand means I'm not sure if it will really happen. But so there used to be this, or there was a thing that Tom Brady had when he did his little documentary, and it was called Tom versus Time. And I always think about education as, the teachers versus time. And we just don't have enough time. So when we say we want our teachers to be the best at, how do we work with our different kinds of learners, and how do we really effectively run an internship, and what's the best reading program, and how do we better teach math to our students? And then we look at the time that we have. What time do we have to educate our teachers and give them the professional training that they need and afford them opportunities to try things out and collaborate with colleagues? If I could really think of one thing that we need, it's time. It's not even necessarily bringing in experts, and teachers need time to talk to each other and to learn from one another, and to then go bring things back out into practice with their students.
But how would you do that?
Well, you'd have to do that creatively, because with that need for time would then come a need for money. Because if we have, and so here's the thing about teaching, you spend 6.5 hours a day actually physically doing your job. And then you need to find this other amount of time to learn how to do your job, or to review your data and decide what's tomorrow going to look like based on what today looks like. And that might look like bringing in substitutes and covering teachers for X number of days so they can actually have time to do some of this learning. And if we were to do something like that, that might mean training for our substitutes, so we make sure that we have high quality people in front of a classroom. No teacher ever wants to be out of their classroom.
Right.
Because again, it's time. We have 180 days. It's a finite amount of time. I have a lot that I've got to impart in these students and help them learn. It would be perhaps money to help determine what's the best way of looking at things. Maybe there are, I said we don't necessarily need experts, but in some cases we might. It might be, this won't be a very popular suggestion, but lengthening our school day for the workday part of it. So there are some districts where, teachers work 8 to 4 and the kids come in for a shorter amount of time, but there's certain professional learning and things that can happen outside of the hours that when students are here. But again, obviously we would compensate our teachers for that.
But I've always had the issue that in industry, we have competitive pay for at-will employees. I would be absolutely comfortable finding a way to finance, not 180 days, but 220 days. Not 60 grand. I mean, people who are executive assistants, secretaries, workers are making 50, 60 grand. I'm trusting the future of my child to somebody. I'd rather personally, and this is blasphemy from finance, but pay everybody 100 grand and say, but you got to earn your way. If I don't earn my way at my job, and I'm one of the low 5%, I'm at will. They just say goodbye. But could you do that in school?
No.
But
Well,
why?
I mean, I guess yes and no. So I think that, and I love your idea about like adding days, but right now we have a system that's not necessarily set up to do that. So our teachers work under the confines of a contract that's agreed on between the school committee and the Teachers Association, and that's certainly not unique to Milford. That's public
No, that's-
education. But what we do have, which has nothing to do with kind of getting rid of the bottom 5%, and here's kind of a great analogy to why sometimes we ask for things. What teachers often will need is some professional support and someone to help them grow professionally. So in the system that we have right now, whose job is that? Is that a coach? Is that a principal? Is that assistant principal? And when you're looking at principals and assistant principals who are supervising and evaluating 40 teachers, that's an impossible model. Because what that is basically brings you down to a drive-by. You have
Yes.
a short amount of time. You don't necessarily have the time that you want to be able to build a skill set or to help even a really high-performing teacher. We still want to see them grow because no one's skill set should be stagnant. But we do have a model, and that's called the teacher evaluation system that does help us identify those teachers who aren't performing the way that we would like them to. That has nothing to do with the pay scale because that's not
and
connected
this is
to
where
that.
I have
You're
a
right.
problem.
Right.
Your top teachers, and I have nothing but admiration for the Milford Teachers Union,
Right.
because I'll never forget that when we were hurting, towns around us had their teachers vote to defer their raises,
Right.
which really struck me, saying, if I can't
Yeah.
afford it today, how do you think I'm going to afford double at the end of the year?
Right.
Our teachers came, well, a union came to the school, the finance committee, school budget committee, and said, we'll forego our raises if you guarantee us that all the money we give up stays in the school department to save our teachers. Well, which I found incredibly unique.
That's highly unusual.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
That I said,
Yeah.
my God,
Very student-centered. Yeah.
these people are Milford people.
Yeah.
Because they're going to give up their raises, not defer, not play games. They're giving it up
Yeah.
to make sure that our kids are taken care of. But I have a fundamental, I don't understand. Because I ask any principal, they'll tell me who their top teachers are. You know, this idea I can't measure. I ask them, who's your top 5 or your bottom 5? Privately, they'll read them right off. But we pay them the same.
Yes, we do.
Now, in industry, we don't. You get merit raises.
Yeah.
Why don't we? See, again, I'd rather have 220 days, pay every dang teacher 100 grand a year, but you fight for your job just like we do.
Yeah, I think that's a bigger than Milford School Committee question. That's really a systemic question. And I think one of the things that happens, especially when you look at a district like ours that's very diverse, what we don't want to see is people getting pigeonholed based on test scores and things like that in terms of their performance. So we do have ways to measure whether students are growing under the leadership of a teacher. And sometimes one student's growth may look very different than another student's based on where they started from. And I think that is one thing that really does frighten teachers is, oh my God, if I'm a really great teacher and I'm a known commodity and I work really well with our special needs students and I work really well with our English language learners, but oh my God, if I have them all, my test scores are going to look terrible, and then I'll be devalued. And
But you
we never
know,
want teachers to be afraid of that.
my daughter taught me something once where she said, Dad, my job as an educator is to get all of my kids to their potential, and maybe a
Absolutely.
little bit more.
Yeah,
But you
Yeah.
got to understand, I got all special needs kids.
yeah,
They don't have the same type potential, the same level potential as a class of typical kids.
yeah,
But if every year, like she came home, she was so excited that the class she took over, this was years ago up at the high school, had all the kids fail MCAS. And I think the first year, she had them all but one passed. Now, saying you passed MCAS, for an advanced class, everybody would say, yeah, okay, big deal. But if you've got kids who always failed,
yeah,
and now all of a sudden passed,
yeah,
that to me is the measurement. It's not that you scored a 32 and the advanced class scored a 78.
yeah.
It's that before you, they were less than 32 and you've moved them up.
Yes, and I think that that's the kind of philosophy that we need to be using when we look at the progress of our teachers. And not, so to your point earlier about you looked at a test score and you said, these aren't any good, and somebody else said that wasn't a great way of looking at it. And I think the great way of looking at it is saying, where do these kids start? Where have we been brought? Where have you brought them? And that's the work that we need to be doing in schools.
And now we come to the point where I have to say, Jen, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
And I'll probably reiterate what I said earlier, which is I've loved the 6 years that I've served on the school committee. I feel I've made a positive contribution. There is nothing that I am more passionate about than education, bringing our young people up and helping them become competent and confident adults has been the way I've made my livelihood and clearly the way I spend my free time. And I'm really asking the town of Milford to allow me the honor of continuing to do that hard yet rewarding work. I'm really looking forward to continuing to work on all the things we just talked about and on helping our school district to be the best that it can be.
Well,
So
thank you for all you've done and
Thank
for
you.
all you'll continue to do.
Thank you.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, thank you for watching. I started out by saying I won't ask you to vote for any specific candidate, but I'll beg you to vote. Ton of places that you can go to learn about these candidates. This show, Kevin Rudden's show, Senior Center. I love the fact that the Milford High School has the candidates going there to talk to our youngsters. Or I can't say youngsters anymore, I'm not allowed to use age, but our up-and-coming adults. But as always, when you see the people who are going to help us, say thank you, because they're a special population in Milford. They're not only willing to say it can be done better, but they're willing to step up and show that they can do it better. So as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Good night.
Not too long since I've been home.